The only black male I saw in a school when I was in school, K through 12, was we had a black janitor when I was in elementary. And so I think that not having, seeing that in a professional sense, but also so many African-American young men who don't have it at home. So I never actually saw black men.
Place matters. I guess for me, when you're talking about like education, it's kind of an interesting topic for me because at 3 years old, at the start of that, I went to daycare right across the street. It's now Operation Breakthrough. Back then it was St. Vincent's, and the experience of being dropped off at that place 30 years ago, this whole area was completely different. The image of what it was, even as a blur, as a 3-year-old, was just a whole different world as to what it is now. And God's plans are kind of cool in that way. To be back here 30 years later, a part of a renaissance, to really make an impact, join a food desert and have a diverse body of people walking through the door, to patronize something that is beneficial to life and longevity that's the thing that I'm proud of.
I know that this is a narrative for you being the first generation, and that when you were a junior, you had a teacher or a counselor that took you off to nowhere, Nebraska, right? Mm-hmm. And that this experience changed your life. Will you share that?
Her name is Tony Deal. And so here's this little skinny white lady taking a group of black kids in an all-white van, right? And I'm thinking, I've seen this movie before. I'm not gonna make it out of this. And she's like, no, I'm gonna take you and a couple of other athletes to Crete, Nebraska. I went to a high school that was predominantly black. And so for her to even be an all-white teacher, nowadays that's not even a shocker, right? But for her to take the time to say, okay, I wanna show you all that you have options.
I was born to a mother who did not graduate from high school, but she's very creative and very talented. And that poverty created a lack of opportunity for me. And in the 3rd grade, I was tested for a gifted program at the bequest of one of my teachers who said, oh, I think your daughter is really smart. And my mom at first didn't understand that because it came out of, I think your daughter is gifted. And my mom thought that meant that I was disadvantaged some way.
My mom had 3 kids. She was a single mom and worked a lot. And at the end of the day, sometimes still couldn't afford a place on her own. We had to house jump a lot. Kindergarten through 5th grade, we were in a lot of different schools. From a science magnet school to an Olathe school to South Kansas City school. What I didn't know then was that there were different cultural norms that were expected at the time, and you just had to adjust.
I went to Crispus Attucks Elementary, which is off of Prospect. Was really integrated, just felt very close, connected. And my parents always wanted us to have the best education. So we kind of moved a lot when I was younger, up until 4th grade. In 4th grade, they settled in Blue Springs, completely different experience. I felt disoriented, I felt ostracized, I felt my identity, who was I?
There are absolutely kids who go home every night to trauma and then have to come in the next day and learn. Then there's kids who go home to stability and they go and they learn. How do you define that without saying disadvantage? How do you separate that?
Because that happens in every zip code, though. So you don't have to necessarily. There are rural and suburban kids who have that same plight of poverty, of trauma.
Before that concentration, how would you define that, right? Because you need to have an approach to solve that problem, or to figure out how to get at the root of what's going on if a kiddo comes in and is not able to be educated because everything else is going wrong in life. And like you said, I realize that that's apparent in every zip code, but it's more apparent in some than others.
You really make me think about how powerful, when we place identities on other people, how powerful that can be.
That's a lot of pressure too, because again, I had this amazing article, my face is on in the Kansas City Star. So now I'm like, oh, India, you have to make it now. Yeah. You have to go to college. You have to come back and do all of these things for your community.
We can't even define something we so quickly use, right? That's an urban school. That's not an urban school. And we say, well, define it. Well, I don't know how to define it, but I know those kids they just don't have good lives. They got good parents. They have money. They have families who love them. And so it sort of speaks to how we have backed ourselves into this crazy corner and we really don't know how to get out yet.
It's coded language.
Yeah.
Right? So what we're talking about is just coded language. When we hear, when we hear on the news, this normally doesn't happen in a suburban area. We know what that means. We don't really ask a person to label themselves. We give labels. We place labels on people, and they internalize them.
Went and got tested. I was marked or told that I was gifted, whatever that meant at the time. And that completely changed from neighborhood school, where unfortunately the neighborhood I grew up in St. Louis, there was some prostitution, wasn't really safe. So it came from me going to an unsafe school that wasn't very engaging to a school where everyone was happy to be there.
I went from a predominantly low-income minority community school where culturally, or where the norm was, you had to be tough to make it.
I was writing a book on high school and college leadership, and so I spent a year in classrooms, and I realized that, I don't know how popular or unpopular the statement's going to be, preface, but not all teachers are made equal. Teaching is only part transferring knowledge. The other part is managing a classroom and the psychology of 20 to 30 little people, little adults.
If you got in a fight, that made you cool, that made you fit in, that made you get friends because you were tough, you weren't scared. And then I went to one of the maybe wealthiest zip codes in Kansas City to having to be nice. So I remember first day shutting some girl's locker, being like, what's up? And they were like, oh my gosh, like what's happening? And I learned no, you actually have to interact with these students a lot differently than you would.
And the education was different. It was completely different. It was project-based. It was algebra in middle school. It was constitution tests in middle school. And we were all put a grade ahead.
When I moved to 6th grade center north of the river, it was a completely different experience than any of the schools that I had visited south of the river. I saw the differences, the difference that place makes. So where you live matters. Your environment is a huge indicator of the type of education you're going to receive. I didn't realize at the time as a kid, but I saw later on how there's not equality, even just 15 minutes apart.
So then you come back, working towards graduation, and you're featured in a KC Star article.
Yes, so the Kansas City Star had their education section, and here I am, seriously, it's really cheesy. I was looking up towards the sky, and Westport's behind me, and I'm like, I'm gonna make a difference. And I thought it was an opportunity for them to highlight, leadership qualities or just some other things that I'm doing in the community. But there was a point in the article where they made it, a point to say, this is an at-risk kid. At that time, again, I thought everyone was going to college. I thought Westport was a great school. I didn't look at it through that lens. And now, again, in the role that I'm in, I'm like, okay, that's a problem.
Being defined as at-risk.
At-risk. It shouldn't have been a surprise that I want to go to college.
I go to schools a lot, and I sit in these urban schools and look at these kids, and I tell them hey, you're no different. We're the same person. I'm just a lot older than you. And I think really it's like a belief, a deep-seated belief in self that I'm capable. Yeah. I can literally do this.
Keep in mind, it's compounded when you are an African American male boy growing up without a dad. Right? So you still don't have that anchor. And so you only can look at yourself. So you become very interdependent to try to figure out, well, what's a black male? And who do you turn to? Do you turn to the media? And you're like, well, I don't like that definition. And you can't turn to big business because there are no black men there. So you do struggle and you become very interdependent. And so I think it takes you a very long time to get to understand who you are as a black male.
Classmates would say, this is the first time we've seen a black person.
Some of the research is saying that young African American males are not going into the teaching profession because they see how they're treated in schools, or they see how the few black teachers they have are being treated.
In 4th grade, I went home to my parents like, you know, we got to go back to the city. We got to get out of here. I don't fit in. This is not this is not me.
To put it into context, if we could imagine a white woman not having access to white women, or black women not having access to black women.
I definitely hate this rhetoric of, you know, the lone black girl wishing that she was white type of thing, because I know that probably a lot of us wrestled with that when we were younger, but I definitely wish I was white.
I've been in rooms with all white educators who say things like, well, you know, African American boys will get in trouble more. You know, African American boys will have more SWATs, will, you know, be placed in with an IEP, and I'm sitting right there.
It went from 4th grade being the kid that did not fit in to 5th grade. I was like, you know what? I'm going to be the funny black kid, basically. And not really realizing that was a trope, that was a stereotype at that time. But I was like, that allows me to fit in.
Allows you to like settle into some identity.
Yeah, and so, you know, kids would come up to me and be like, tell me a joke.
Education is one of the most segregated sectors in the United States, next to the church, which is intense. We have so many, and everyone in education is a professional, but then no one has fixed it.
I was reflecting on our black and brown children being taught by majority white teachers. And like, when did this shift happen, you know? And in the past, right after Emancipation Proclamation, when teachers would flood down to the South to teach in these one-room school homes or schoolhouses, these black kids, and how they were trying to Yankeefy black kids at that time. So act a certain way, do this, dress this way, you know, speak a certain way. And so I was wondering, like, reflecting, are we getting back to being Yankeefied? Because I personally have not seen a school where majority of the students were white being taught by minority teachers.
I feel guilty about it, though. I don't know if anybody else feels that way about having opportunities, but I feel like that should have been an experience for every kid. Project-based learning.
I felt guilty that I was the one that went to college. I'm in my 30s and I'm still the only one in my family with a college degree. And I'm like, okay, what do I do?
You don't have to be labeled as gifted to benefit from an engaging educational experience. And I kind of feel like that system in St. Louis with the 3 gifted schools for elementary, middle, and high school, it really kind of picks you out to say you're worth this opportunity and other kids aren't in some way.
And it's really driven me to have a presence in education. It's driven me to go into the classroom. You know, I left a job so I could be in the classroom, and every day I was in the classroom, I felt incredibly fortunate.
I still struggled in the material. The education was completely different from Kansas City Public School District, but my parents always invested so much time and dedication to me.
I remember the first time I referred to an African-American male as brother. Like, it was all forced, and I hit the R all hard. What's up, brother? And I just smacked it, right? And he kind of looked at me and was like, okay, that was your first. But now the bruh just rolls off the tongue. I had to really learn to understand who I was, an African-American male, but then also understand how I was in fellowship with other African-American men and how we were just so like interconnected versus me being interconnected.
It's a shame in this country for a minority to have to investigate their culture or their race or who they are, right? And so it's not something that you're learning unintentionally in the schools.
I do feel like it can be negative when you strip too much of yourself away and you question and say, who am I? And you don't know who you are. But if you're strong in who you are and you know who you are, who your identity is, or who you are as a person, or what your passions are, then you should be that in every setting.
Whether it be for kids in school or for anyone, like what would be practices you would prescribe for being more creative?
I would urge students to not discredit what can seem like mundane or small things. I also intentionally would seek to be around people that were different from me and thought different. I would urge students to take their time seriously because I do think 15, 16, 17, 18, how you spend your time in those years really directly correlates with your 20s, 30s, and 40s, even if it feels like it doesn't.
So now I'm like, what can we do is make sure that the circle of people that we connect with and, you know, that we surround ourselves with is diverse to keep our minds open.
And by doing that, you're able to challenge false narratives through your experiences and to open yourself up like something like this. Like challenge yourself, say yes, like come to the table, listen to hard things when they're hard, accept like what you're hearing and apply it.
I intentionally wanted to get a graduate certificate in Africana studies to learn about the diaspora of African people around the world.
Yeah. So whether it be based on like that knowledge you gained from that experience or just reflecting on your own, what would you try to pass down to improve the experiences of people who might be going through a similar situation?
I definitely try to like instill just being yourself, you know, like just being comfortable with talking about race, being comfortable talking about blackness and white and Hispanics.
I remember Ruby Jean's Open in Westport, and this is what people said. They didn't say what they had, they didn't say what they were drinking. They were like, and a brother owns it, right? And so, like, and then exactly. But then when I heard you speak about the story, I started saying this was someone who took a narrative from the past, held on to it, gave it a name and shared it with everybody and said, this is something good from the past. So everyone gets to see this legacy and be a part of this legacy. But sometimes we hold on to those negative legacies. We still hold on to a negative legacy when we hold on to truth. We still hold on to a negative legacy when we hold on to an east side, west side.
I believe that my trajectory in life has led me to a place where I'm very comfortable to talk about things that others would distance themselves from.
We do not talk about the things that we need to be talking about every single day.
Right? Isn't it kind of ironic? Like, it's the elephant in the room.
At all times.
The elephant in the room at all times, and no one is addressing it.
I'm proud of being a black man and having this business. That is super dope to me. But I just am who I am, and I'm passionate about what I'm passionate about. You know, I want the narrative to switch where it's like, this is just a great business. You know, I spoke at, I don't know where, and the guy was like, well, how does it feel to be a successful black-owned business? And I'm like, man, I'm proud of being black. I'm Chris. I woke up like that. I really just want people to walk in and respect what we're doing, the passion behind what we're doing, and that it's just an amazing business. So changing that narrative, yes, I think supporting black business is great. I would be crazy not to think that way, but when does black business shift over to just being business?
I think that's one place it starts, is just changing the paradigm of how we think about the African American male. Are we going to throw out a statistic saying that African American male is always in trouble, or are we going to say that African American male is prized? It's just a change of a mindset.
Leadership development was huge for me. I mean, I think anyone can be a leader in the community, and I think anybody should feel empowered to do so despite where they come from, what they look like.
And how we define leadership, right? The way that we define leadership often influences who become involved in those programs to begin with.
Yep,
too.
absolutely.
Yeah. Living a life now dedicated to education and equity in education, what would you say is the biggest practical thing you've learned from that could be implemented, whether public or private, whether gifted or not, that could really affect the lives of more children?
One, that you don't track students. You look at everyone equally, their abilities. You put every opportunity in front of all kids and you prepare them to do well in those opportunities. Even if that means I'm preparing you to do dual credit or IB courses, or I'm preparing you to enter the workforce. I think we have to look at all kids as capable.
It's not something where I'm saying white teachers should not be in black schools. However, I do definitely think that there should be some type of pre-bias or some type of discussion about bias in the classroom or the way that our preconceived notions can affect the way that we do teach.
Relationships can last for almost a lifetime. There are teachers that I'm still in touch with, advisors I'm still in touch with, and in fact, now as an entrepreneur, some of those teachers and advisors are now sending business to me.
I do recognize that it completely changed my life, and I really don't know what I would be doing right now if I hadn't I had that experience.
If you just look at me, you would never know where I've come from or what I've been through. But that's okay with me because I want you to be surprised when you talk to me. You know, I want to be able to interact with anyone at any time in any environment. And I feel like that's really shaped me to be able to do that.
I'm no longer following wealth. I'm following purpose. I just love what I do. It's a purpose now. And I think that's what you have to do.